I never expected that this phone call would change everything. It was an ordinary Tuesday, no different from hundreds of others, and as always, I was sitting at my desk in a spacious office on the 14th floor, looking through quarterly reports, while the aroma of freshly ground coffee filled the room, creating the illusion of comfort in the midst of an endless pile of numbers and graphs. The sun's rays filtered through the tall windows, reflecting on the glass surface of the table, and nothing foretold that the world that I had built around myself with such care would suddenly crack. When the phone screen flashed with an incoming call, and my mother's number was displayed on it, my cup, half filled with hot coffee, almost slipped out of my hands. She hadn't called me for several years, and at first I even thought it was a mistake or someone's prank. "Laura, is that you?" Her voice sounded different, strangely strained, as if she had to overcome something inside herself to utter those words. "Yes, Mom, what happened?" I tried to keep my voice level, without unnecessary emotions, restrained and professional. After all, I was the head of a department at a large company, and that imposed certain obligations to maintain composure in any situation, even when my mother, whom I hadn't heard from in years, was calling. "Your father died yesterday. The funeral is in 3 days." I felt the air get stuck in my chest, and my fingers, clutching the phone, turned white with tension. Those words stabbed me like a knife in the back, suddenly and mercilessly. "Dad is gone." Just a few short words, uttered in a dry voice, and the world around me seemed to tilt, turning into a shaky void. Why am I being informed about this only now? Why didn't I find out sooner? I gripped the edge of my desk tighter, feeling the cold glass under my palms, and was grateful that my office was in a separate room where no one could see how pale I turned and barely caught my breath. "What happened?" I asked, barely audible, even though I already knew the answer in advance. "A heart attack," my mother said shortly, and in the background I heard the muffled sobs of my sister Sarah. "Sure. He died at work." "Where else?" "Dad always worked tirelessly, without rest, without complaint, to provide for them, my unemployed mother and my 23-year-old sister, who never worked a day in her life, preferring the role of an eternal child for whom someone always had to pay." I felt a dull wave of anger rising inside, hot and suffocating, but I swallowed it down. "Why didn't you tell me right away?" "We were shocked, Laura. Everything happened so fast." My mother's voice faltered, but I didn't feel a drop of remorse in it. "The funeral is on Friday, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Will you come?" "Of course I'll come," I said firmly, feeling an icy lump tighten in my chest. My father was the only one who supported me when I made the decision to leave home and start an independent life, who was genuinely happy about my admission to university when my mother and Sarah were too busy choosing a prom dress for my sister, who called me at least for a couple of minutes, even if he had to sneak out of work just to ask how I'm doing. Now he was gone. I sat in silence, looking at the endless maze of streets outside the window, as the memories one by one surfaced in my mind. How my mother always favored Sarah, how I had to give in, how she missed my important moments for her sister. When I joined the debate team, but my mom didn't come to my first competition because Sarah had a dance concert on the same day. When I found my first job at the age of 16, and instead of being proud, I heard only annoyance in my mother's voice that now I wouldn't have time to help my sister with homework. That's why I left as soon as I got the chance. She graduated from college on a scholarship, found a good job, rented an apartment in the city center and never looked back. Dad understood. He came when he could, brought little gifts, and was proud of me in a way my mother had never been proud of. Now he was gone. The funeral home turned out to be filled with people, relatives, colleagues of the father, old family friends. I barely recognized some of the faces, but they all came to say goodbye to a man who had worked himself to death at the age of 54. I stood to the side, watching as people took turns approaching my mother and Sarah, expressing condolences, while they stood in the center, sobbing and accepting words of comfort. Oh, Margaret, Aunt Susan's voice trembled as she squeezed her mother's hand. If you need anything. It's going to be so hard without Richard. Mom dabbed her eyes with a napkin, sobbing. He was our only source of income. I do not know how we will cope now. I felt my jaw clench when I once again heard a note of ostentatious helplessness in my mother's voice, and Sarah, sitting next to me, let out another theatrical sob, causing several relatives to rush to comfort her at once, as if she had lost someone more important than me, as if her father was only hers, not ours. Shared. I couldn't help but glance at her perfectly coiffed hair, neat makeup, and flawless manicure. It was strange that her father's death didn't seem to stop her from maintaining her appearance in perfect order. Obviously, unemployment had its advantages, because she always had time for herself while Dad worked 2 shifts, while he was rushing between work and home, providing them with a comfortable life, which I had to take care of myself. He worked so hard for us, Mom continued, pursing her lips and clasping her hands in a lock, as if trying to hold back tears. Now it's just me and Sarah, with no income. Her voice carried through the room filled with relatives and acquaintances who had come to say goodbye to my father, and with every word the tension inside me grew. It seemed to me that the funeral had turned into some kind of sad production, where Mom played the role of a tragically orphaned widow, and Sarah played the role of a lost, helpless daughter, while the reality was completely different. I couldn't listen to it anymore. I had to go out and breathe in the cool air, which at least helped me calm my growing anger. Just 2 weeks ago, Dad called me. His voice sounded tired, as if he was holding on with his last strength. He had just finished his 2nd shift and confessed almost in a whisper, "I need to provide comfort for the girls, you know." And then I should have said something, tried to stop him, made him think about himself, and not just about them. But I didn't say anything. I returned to the house and endured 2 more agonizing hours of listening to my mother's endless speeches about financial difficulties, about how difficult everything would be now, how difficult it would be for them. Sarah played her role perfectly, sitting with a sad face and downcast eyes, allowing others to comfort her and feel sorry for her. None of them mentioned that they had enough time to find a job, but they never did. When the last guests started to leave, I was about to put on my coat and leave, but Mom suddenly called out to me. "Laura, wait. We need to talk." I followed her and Sarah into the kitchen, where the dim lamplight made the space even more cramped and stuffy. Mom suddenly turned to me abruptly, and a strange expression appeared on her face. Tears glistened in her eyes, but something in her gaze seemed insincere, as if she was already replaying the rehearsal of the next act in her head. "Laura, I know that things weren't going well between us," she began, interlacing her fingers. "I know that I often ignored you, that I always paid more attention to Sarah." Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed my sister rolling her eyes and curling her lips, as if these words irritated her. "But your father's death showed me how fragile life is. We need to put aside all grudges. We need to become a family again." I wanted to scream. I wanted to break the silence with accusations, to say that my father could have been alive if he hadn't worked, if he hadn't taken on all their carelessness, if they had at least tried to take care of themselves. While I was building a career, while I was working nights to pay for my education, they were quietly living at his expense. Those words burned my throat, but I didn't say any of them. Now was not the time. "Why are you talking about family only now? Why are you suddenly concerned about our reconciliation right now?" I asked cautiously. Mom's face contorted for a moment, as if she hadn't expected this question, but then she pulled herself together. "How could you think that?" Her voice trembled with mock resentment. "Your father left us a house and some savings. We can handle it for now. I just want my daughter back." I wasn't sure if I believed her, but I nodded. "I don't mind trying," I said calmly. "But let's do it gradually." "Of course, dear, as you see fit," Mom replied softly. The way back to the apartment seemed like a blur, through which the lights of the night city, distant voices on the streets, and the hum of cars swept by. I was sitting in the living room, looking out the window, and I caught myself thinking that maybe Mom was right. Perhaps my father's death really should have been the wake-up call. Maybe we should try to build a relationship again, because at least she admitted her mistakes. Wasn't that the first step? A week passed, and Mom called me first. "Laura, come to dinner with us. I'm making your favorite lasagna," she said in a voice full of warmth and joy. I almost laughed. In the good old days, she made lasagna only at Sarah's request. But I decided to give them a chance. The house looked exactly the same as it had on the day of the funeral. The same dark corners, the same oppressive atmosphere, but now Dad's shoes were missing near the front door, a detail that for some reason cut my heart the most. Sarah was casually sprawled out on the couch, scrolling through the tape on her phone, and didn't even bother to look at me when I walked in. "Everything is so expensive now," Mom sighed, taking lasagna out of the oven. I almost fainted when I saw the grocery bill that Mom had defiantly left on the table, as if flaunting her own suffering, and then, with exaggerated drama, she began to tell me how incredibly expensive everything was now and how difficult it was for them without Dad's income. "And don't make me start talking about utilities," she continued, setting the plates in front of me, surprisingly new, as if they had just been bought. "The electric company must think we're made of money." I watched her deftly serve the food, not forgetting to fill her glass to the brim with wine, and at that moment, unable to restrain myself, I asked the question that had been on my tongue for a long time. "Have you started looking for a job yet?" I tried to sound calm and neutral, but Mom immediately looked away, concentrating on putting the lasagna on plates, as if it was the most important thing in the world for her at that moment. "Oh, honey," she drawled, barely noticeably sighing, "the labor market is terrible right now. Companies are laying off people, layoffs are everywhere." She paused for a moment and then, as if catching herself, added, "Did you know that cheese prices have increased by 30%? And the internet bill is just a highway robbery." I pressed my lips together, trying not to show my emotions, when Sarah finally showed signs of life at the dinner table, who had been completely engrossed in her phone until that moment. "My friends say that now everything is twice as expensive," she said, rolling her eyes and listlessly picking at her plate with a fork. "How to live in general." I took a sip of water, choosing my words carefully, because I knew exactly how this conversation would end. "You know, when you work and receive a regular salary, this price increase is not so noticeable." This phrase hung in the air like thick, suffocating smoke, but, as expected, neither Mom nor Sarah reacted to it, pretending that they had not heard the obvious hint. "We'll find something eventually," Mom finally said, waving her hand casually, as if I'd raised a trivial question. "But for now, we'll just have to fasten our seatbelts a little." That sounds like a great idea. I couldn't keep the sarcasm out of my voice. Belt tightening is very tempering. The temperature in the room dropped instantly, and I could almost feel an invisible, icy wall stretching between us. Sarah grimaced, her perfect eyebrows arched in obvious displeasure, and her mother's smile became strained and fragile, like a porcelain mask ready to shatter at any moment. They spent the rest of the evening in tense silence, barely talking, and they responded to my attempts to keep up the conversation with cold, monosyllabic phrases. This strange pattern continued for several weeks. I came to dinner, my mother complained about the expenses, I made harsh remarks about work, and they stubbornly ignored them, playing the helplessness in front of me. It was like a strange dance in which everyone knew the moves, but no one wanted to listen to the music. And then Saturday came, when the second shoe finally fell. I had just finished helping my mom wash the dishes after dinner when she suddenly nervously cleared her throat, clearly preparing for something important. "Laura, dear. We need to talk about something." I raised an eyebrow, anticipating what exactly would be discussed. "The washing machine broke down yesterday." My mother began with a barely concealed sigh. "Water is everywhere. You know how expensive repairs are now." I already felt where everything was going, but I kept silent, allowing her to continue. We really need a new one. Sarah joined the conversation now, nodding her head vigorously. I thought. Mom looked at me with an expression of desperate hope. Maybe, if you could, would you help us with the money for this? I looked at them both. Mom, with pleading eyes, Sarah, with an expectant look, as if she was already sure that my answer would be positive. And a part of me, unknowingly, suddenly felt sorry. Pity for both of them, sitting in this house full of memories of how Dad spent his whole life trying to bring them to a decent level. Pity for this once cozy kitchen, where his laughter could once be heard, but now only emptiness remains. But another part of me remembered all those years when they took advantage of his generosity without thinking about the future, when he, exhausted and tired, continued to work 2 shifts to ensure their comfortable life. And now that he's gone, they've come to me with the same request they made to him. I won't give you any money, I said firmly, watching their faces fall. Mom opened her mouth as if to protest, but I interrupted her, not giving her time for unnecessary words. But I'll buy you a washing machine myself. Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. She obviously expected a different answer, but she had no choice. Okay, Mom said, and although her voice remained steady, there was a distinct note of disappointment in it. If that's how you want to do it. I could see from her face that this wasn't the answer she and Sarah were waiting for, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to give away money that probably wouldn't have reached the washing machine. I knew their habits too well. I saw too often how the funds allocated for necessary things were melting away in endless shopping trips and unnecessary purchases. So I took control of the situation. I chose a reliable washing machine, the Whirlpool model, which is not the most expensive, but energy efficient and durable. I scheduled the delivery and installation on Tuesday morning, taking half a day off work specifically to check everything. When the technicians were done, Mom walked around the car like a real estate agent inspecting the dubious apartment he was forced to live in. It's cute, she said, in a tone that implied it was anything but cute. Although I saw an amazing Samsung model with a lot of functions in the appliance store. I reached into my purse, took out the receipt, and handed it to her. When you buy your own washing machine, you can choose the most fashionable model you want. Mom suddenly laughed, too loudly and unnaturally. Oh, I'm just teasing, honey. This one is really perfect. I nodded, but I didn't believe for a second that she was sincere. In the following months, it began to seem to me that the house was purposefully falling apart, as if protesting my decision not to give them money directly. First, the refrigerator broke down. The repairman, after examining it, just shook his head and said that fixing it would cost more than buying a new one. As a result, I spent the whole Sunday afternoon choosing equipment with my mother, who wisely refrained from commenting on the price this time. Then the dishwasher broke down. Sarah called me in a panic, choking in despair, as if she had heard about the existence of washing dishes by hand for the first time in her life. We can't live like this. She wailed on the phone, as if the disaster was comparable to a global catastrophe. I had to add a dishwasher to my growing shopping list. The coffee maker was next. Your father always said that there should be good coffee in the house. My mother drawled, and a note of longing trembled in her voice. I couldn't argue with the memory of my father. I bought them a Quinner, the same model that I had at home, although I knew perfectly well that they would have done with something simpler. Every time I went shopping myself, I noticed that I couldn't help but grab something for them, a new toaster, a set of pots, or something else that could make their lives more convenient. It seemed to me that I was just helping them cope with their loss, to make their home more comfortable. But sometimes, late at night, I found myself wondering if I was continuing the cycle that started with Dad. Am I encouraging their addiction, as he has been doing all these years? Mom kept hinting that it would be much more convenient if I just gave her the money, but I didn't give up. I knew all too well how they knew how to manage finances, How easily necessary purchases turned into expensive handbags and trips to beauty salons. The largest expense item was furniture in the living room. "This old sofa reminds me too much of Dad," Mom said one evening, rubbing her temples. "He always fell asleep on it, watching TV after long shifts." The cupboards, she said, also caused her pain because they contained his old books and magazines. As a result, I replaced them as well. New sofa, new closets, new memories. My credit card was damaged, but at least now I knew where the money was going. And then one day, during dinner, Sarah suddenly announced I was invited for an interview. She almost jumped up in her chair, and I froze for a moment, almost choking on a piece of meat. "This is an administrative position at Thompson & Brooks." After months of endless complaints and vague promises that she was looking for options, this was the first concrete news. Mom beamed with pride, as if Sarah had already become the CEO of the company, and not just received an invitation to an interview. She literally glowed, scattering in enthusiastic comments, in which she already saw her youngest daughter as a successful career woman, although she had not even passed the first stage of selection yet. "That's great," I said, trying not to scare away this sudden enthusiasm. "When is the interview scheduled?" Sarah, shifting the peas around her plate with a fork, answered slowly. "Next week." She was clearly dragging her feet, as if something was bothering her, and I sensed that a catch in this conversation was inevitable. "But, there's a problem," she finally said, biting her lip. "Which one?" "I need something businesslike to wear," she said, as if she were talking about something as important as saving the world. "You know how important a first impression is. People from the HR department evaluate you based on your appearance." "We could go shopping together," I suggested, understanding where she was going, but still hoping that I would be able to steer the situation in a constructive direction. "I know some great places where you can find good office clothes." Sarah's face twisted as if I'd suggested we dig into a second-hand container. "Laura, I'm 23. I think I can choose the outfit myself," she said irritably. "I've already found the perfect costume, I just need the money to buy it." "About $500 should be enough." $500. For the costume, which she didn't even show. Over the next hour, Sarah talked about how this job could be her big breakthrough, and my mother recalled how she helped me with my first job interview outfit, emphasizing that family support in such moments is the most important thing. The two of them handled me so skillfully that at some point I began to doubt my own principles. I broke my rule. "Okay," I said, pulling out my phone. "I'll transfer $500, but I want to see this suit when you buy it." Sarah immediately jumped up from her seat and rushed to hug me with a beaming smile. "You are the best big sister in the world." A week later, while scrolling through my Instagram feed, I came across a photo of Sarah. Definitely not in an office suit. She was posing in some club, holding a cocktail in her hands. She was wearing a shiny red dress, which, as I immediately guessed, cost exactly $500. I felt like everything was boiling inside. I clicked on the profile and opened more photos. Sarah is dancing. Sarah takes a selfie. Sarah is with her friends, laughing, having fun. Everything is in this very dress, her interview suit. The next morning, I didn't even think about what to do. I got in the car and drove straight to my mom's house. Sarah was still in her pajamas, at noon, with a dull look and a clearly rumpled appearance. "How was the interview?" I asked softly, suppressing the anger that was bubbling in my chest. Sarah blinked and smiled tightly, but her eyes were wandering. "Oh, okay," she mumbled, avoiding my gaze. "Very well." "It's wonderful." I nodded. "Can I see the costume you're wearing?" "The one you bought with my money?" Sarah's face paled. "He's, at the dry cleaners." I took out my phone, opened the photos I found the day before, and handed her the screen. "It's funny," I said icily. "Because, according to your Instagram, my $500 bought you a completely different outfit." Sarah's eyes instantly filled with tears. "Are you spying on me?" I snorted. "It's not espionage if you put it in the public domain yourself." "You lied to me." "Sarah, you've never had an interview." She sobbed and buried her face in her hands, but I didn't let her continue the performance. "You're so mean." She finally got up, sobbing. "I needed this dress, you know. All my friends needed to look the part. We were going to a party. I gave you money for an interview, Sarah." "Laura," Mom intervened, and there was already weariness in her voice, but not condemnation of Sarah, but rather annoyance at me. "Don't be so hard on her. She's young, she needs to have fun too." That was the last straw. I felt like a long-standing resentment that had been building up inside for years finally broke through, like a taut string that was about to snap. "I'm not going to buy you any more household appliances," I said, feeling my voice tremble, but not allowing myself to cry. "I'm not going to renovate your house anymore. And I definitely won't give you money for fake job interviews anymore. You're on your own now." They started talking at the same time, protesting, pleading, making excuses, but I couldn't hear them anymore. I turned around and left, slamming the door. I left feeling like something was changing inside of me, like anger and frustration were intertwined into one, as I finally realized that they would never change. They will always be looking for another handout, another excuse, another lie. 3 weeks of silence. I ignored all the calls, messages, and voice notifications from Mom and Sarah, and every time their names popped up on the phone screen, I felt a strange mixture of anger and relief, anger at their betrayal, at their endless attempts to manipulate me, at the lies they looked into my eyes, and relief because that I finally didn't have to get involved in their constant drama anymore, because for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was breathing freely, that I didn't have to solve other people's problems, that I could just live my life without looking back. But then December came, bringing with it the first snow, a cold wind that covered the windows with frost, and unexpected memories of past family Christmas holidays, the smell of pine needles in the house, how Dad opened gifts with childish delight, about rare moments of comfort, which now seemed almost fabulous, and when I had almost overcome this feeling of nostalgia when the doorbell rang. I opened it. My mother stood in front of me, wrapped in my father's old winter coat. Her shoulders were slumped, her face looked pale and tired, and there was a shadow of something in her eyes that I couldn't immediately recognize remorse or another carefully prepared performance. "Laura," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, my mind screaming that this was a trick again, that I shouldn't give in, that I had already been disappointed in them too many times. But the sight of Dad's coat, this old, slightly worn, but such a familiar object, made me feel suddenly weak, as if something was squeezing my throat, and I suddenly remembered how he came to my school performances alone, because Mom was busy with Sarah. As soon as he supported me, as soon as he was proud of me, and I knew that if he were alive, he would want me to at least try. "Christmas is coming," Mom continued, her breath steaming white in the cold hallway. "Your father always said that holidays are a time for family." I clenched my fingers on the doorknob, feeling two voices fighting inside me, one saying that this was just manipulation, that she was playing on my emotions again, and the other whispering that maybe it was worth giving them a chance. Wasn't that what Dad was talking about? Sarah peeked over Mom's shoulder, surprisingly quiet. Her face was unusually subdued. "Please," she whispered, and there was something strangely sincere in her voice. I sighed and stepped aside, letting them enter the apartment, already asking myself in advance if I was making a mistake. They settled on my couch while I went to the kitchen to make tea, a familiar ritual that always helped me calm down, Dad's solution to everything, whether it was a bad day or family quarrels, and while I waited for the water to boil, it seemed to me that he was somewhere nearby, that he was watching it. He's waiting for me to take the next step. When I returned to the living room, Mom accepted the cup from my hands with gratitude and smiled slightly. "We miss you," she said, looking at me with the same pleading look she gave me the last time she asked me to help them with the money. "The house seems empty without you." Sarah nodded, clutching her cup. "I'm sorry about the dress," she muttered, without looking up. "I shouldn't have lied." I sat down across from them, watching the steam rise from my tea, and suddenly realized that the anger that had sustained me for the past few weeks had begun to melt like snow under the winter sun, leaving behind something else, a tired but lingering sadness, similar to the one I felt at my father's funeral. Maybe Dad would really like us to try again. Maybe the holidays are a time for a second chance. "I just want us to be a real family again," Mom whispered, holding out her hand to me. "Your father would hate to see us like this." We spent the next hour talking, for the first time in real life, without exchanging reproaches, without pretending, without demanding anything from each other, just talking as if for the first time in many years. Mom shared stories about Dad that I'd never heard before. Sarah showed me photos from her real job search, or at least she claimed she was looking for a job, and it suddenly seemed to me that maybe something new could really be built from the ashes of our old relationship. Something better. But the next day at work, my phone vibrated, and a notification from the banking app made me freeze for a moment, a $300 debit to Nordstrom. I frowned. Before I could realize what was happening, another notification popped up. $450 in Saks. My heart sank. I hurriedly opened the banking app and started scrolling through the list of transactions. One purchase after another, expensive clothing stores, boutiques, luxury brands, and all this within the last hour. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the phone and dialed the bank number. "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, even though everything inside was boiling with rage. "I need to report fraudulent payments and block my card immediately." After confirming that the card was blocked, I opened the shopping list again, rereading the numbers, absorbing the reality of what was happening, and then yesterday evening surfaced in my head, the moment when Sarah asked to use my bathroom before leaving, her slightly prolonged absence, strange nervousness. She was rummaging through my purse. She stole my card details. I checked the time. 3:45 p.m. The working day ended in only 2 hours, but it couldn't wait. I packed my things, put on my coat, grabbed my keys, and as I was texting, I told my assistant that I had an emergency family situation and that I urgently needed to leave. I didn't expect an answer. Within minutes, my car was speeding through the snowy streets, and my fingers were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Anger was pounding in his temples, boiling in his chest, dull, icy, permeating every cell of his body. I burst through the front door without even bothering to knock, too angry, too furious to keep up appearances. Sarah was sprawled out on the new sofa, the one I'd bought, and was surrounded by bags from expensive boutiques, which she'd undoubtedly paid for with my card. She was idly flipping through her phone, clearly not feeling the slightest sense of guilt, and didn't even immediately look up when I stepped into the living room. "Give me my credit card back," I said, my voice shaking, but now not from pain, but from rage. Mom hurried out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, and looked at me as if I'd just insulted them both. "Laura, dear, why are you making such a scene?" "She stole from me, Mom." I barely managed not to scream. Yesterday, when Sarah asked to use the bathroom, she rummaged through my purse and took my credit card. Sarah rolled her eyes loudly, sighed heavily, then casually reached for her designer handbag, which I suspected was bought with my money, and pulled out my card. "Great. Here's your precious card." She threw it on my desk like it was trash. "I just needed something for the Christmas party, and you've always been so stingy lately." I abruptly grabbed the card, squeezed it in my fist, feeling the rage rising inside, flooding me, spreading fire through my veins. "Stingy?" I took a step forward, and Sarah recoiled slightly. I bought you a whole house of household appliances and furniture. I paid for your new washing machine, your refrigerator, your cupboards. I furnished this house because you were content to sit back and wait for someone to solve your problems. And you're paying me back by stealing from me? Don't call your sister a thief, Mom said coldly, stepping between us, as if I needed a physical barrier to stop myself. She just bought nice clothes for the holidays. If you weren't so selfish with your money, she wouldn't have to take matters into her own hands. I looked at them both. I really looked at it. My mother stood in front of me with her chin held high, smug and confident, defending theft, justifying it as if it were something normal, something that didn't even deserve to be condemned. Sarah, surrounded by dozens of packages, sat with her arms folded, not looking a bit guilty, as always playing the role of a victim. They were sitting on the couch I'd bought in front of the TV I'd paid for, probably planning to make coffee later in the coffee maker I'd brought into this house. And suddenly something inside me clicked. A plan began to form in my head, and I took a deep breath and forced myself to smile. "You know what, Mom?" I said in a tone that I hoped sounded sincere. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I was really too strict about money." Mom's eyes flashed with satisfaction. "After all, Christmas is a time for family," I continued, artfully hiding the ice in my voice. "Why don't we celebrate it this year with all the relatives?" Mom beamed. "Oh, darling, that would be wonderful." She grabbed my hands, squeezing them enthusiastically. "I'll call everyone right away. We can arrange everything on Christmas Eve, just like when you were little." I smiled. For the next few days, I played my role flawlessly. Every time my mom called to discuss the holiday plans, I enthusiastically supported her ideas, agreed, and said that I was looking forward to this evening. And on December 24th, I arrived earlier than promised, dressed in my best holiday outfit, with a smile on my face, and with gift bags in my hands. "We need to buy some last-minute things for the party," Mom said, standing at the door, already in her coat and with the keys in her hands. "You don't mind, do you?" I took out my wallet as if it was nothing, as if I'd just given up on all the past grudges, and handed them a few $100s. "Take everything you need." They literally snatched the money out of my hands and practically ran out of the house, afraid that I would change my mind, until they disappeared around the corner. As soon as their car was out of sight, I took out my phone and dialed the number I had prepared in advance. "Yes, this is Laura Wilson. Movers can come. I've arranged everything in advance. Movers who are ready to work on Christmas Eve for double pay. The warehouse is on the other side of the city. Even a small moving truck." They arrived within a few minutes, fast, coordinated, professional movers, ready to work on Christmas Eve for double pay, because money does not smell, and time is money. They didn't ask questions, they didn't show any curiosity, they just silently took things and took them out one by one, step by step emptying the house that I had helped so hard to set up. The washing machine that started it all is like the first bone in a chain reaction. The refrigerator where my mom packed the groceries she bought with my money. The dishwasher that Sarah couldn't live without. The coffee maker with which Mom talked about Dad's habits with anguish in her voice, and then easily stole hundreds of dollars from me through her daughter. The sofa where Sarah sprawled, counting the stolen items, not even trying to hide the pleasure of her actions. Closets where she never stored anything except brand new purchases. The house was gradually emptying, exposing its true essence. They had been living on other people's money for so long that when that money was gone, there was nothing left but bare walls and their own helplessness. Finally, I went to the tree, carefully squatted down and placed a small, carefully packed box under it. I knew they would come back, I knew they would be furious, I knew Mom would act out her drama again, but now I didn't care. I looked around the half-empty house one last time, remembering all the moments when Dad and I sat here, talking quietly, while Mom and Sarah enthusiastically wandered around the shops, squandering his hard-earned money, and he just sighed and said, "I want them to have the best of everything." He loved them, blindly, of course, until the very last day of his life. I closed the door behind me and left. My phone rang around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when I was sitting in my cozy, warm apartment, wrapped in a blanket, with a glass of wine in my hand, watching the snow slowly falling outside the window, covering the city with a soft white blanket. Mom's name appeared on the screen. I knew what was coming, but I answered anyway. "Robbed." Her voice was hysterical, high-pitched, filled with a mixture of horror and anger. "Someone broke into the house and took everything. Washing machine, refrigerator, all furniture. Everything is gone. Laura, if you hadn't left." I took another slow sip of wine, allowed a moment's pause to hang in the air before calmly saying, "No one robbed you, Mom." There was a long, heavy silence, then, "What?" "I took everything. Everything I've bought in recent months. It's all in stock now." There was the sound of a thud. I imagined her sinking onto the sofa, or rather, on the spot where he used to stand. "You can't do this." "Stop it," she screamed. "I'm calling the police." I laughed, lightly, almost with relief. "Go on," I said. "I have something for you under the tree, by the way. You should open this." I heard her stamp her foot, the sound of paper being torn apart in rage, then her voice rang out again, this time confused. "It's just a bunch of receipts." "It's not just receipts, Mom. This is proof that I bought every single thing that I took out of this house today. All the appliances, all the furniture, everything is paid for by me." There was a pause, and then a strangled, half sigh, half sob. You're a vindictive little thing. And while you're at it, you might want to explain to the police about Sarah's little shopping trip with my credit card." Mom's voice cracked with rage. "How dare you do this to us? On Christmas Eve. What should we tell everyone?" I smiled, knowing that she wasn't saying this because she was ashamed, but because she was afraid the truth would come out. "I do not know," I said slowly. "Maybe the truth? That you and Sarah have been living off your father's money and my generosity for years, refusing to work? That Sarah stole my credit card? That you were defending her theft?" There was silence on the line again. I hung up the phone. Then I opened the phone settings and blocked her number. The next morning, on Christmas Day, my phone rang again. This time it was my cousin Rachel. "Oh my God, Laura," she was laughing so hard she could barely speak. "You won't believe what happened last night." I smiled. "Tell me everything." "Your mom," Rachel paused, giggling. "She started telling everyone this dramatic story about how ungrateful you are, how you stole all their furniture on Christmas Eve. But then Uncle Bob asked why they hadn't bought their own furniture with all the money they had saved by not working all these years. And Aunt Susan reminded me how Uncle Richard, your father, complained to her that he worked double shifts to support them. I could imagine this scene perfectly. How Mom tried to play the victim. How the family finally realized the truth. Over the next few weeks, the messages poured in one after another. At first, they were angry, accusations, shouts, threats. Then the pleading ones. Mom claimed that they couldn't afford groceries. Sarah swore that she had learned her lesson, that they had changed, that they missed me, that they loved me. I blocked all the new numbers they were trying to contact. I changed my email address. They were deleted from all social networks. Sometimes, on particularly quiet nights, I find myself wondering how they're doing, if they've finally found a job, if they've sold their house, if they've learned any lessons from everything that's happened. But these thoughts don't bother me anymore. I let go. And for the first time in a long time, I feel truly free.